Trump is a big fan of yours. I don't know if you've seen this, but he posted in July. So now fake movie actor George Clooney.
Yeah.
He doesn't know that movies are fake, does he?
I don't think so.
Who never came close
is
to making a great movie is getting into the act. He's turned on Crooked Joe like the rats they both are. What does Clooney know about anything, says the host of Celebrity Apprentice. Clooney should get out of politics and go back to television. Movies never really worked for him.
I will if he does.
Have you thought about writing an op-ed in the Times asking him to step down? Because it worked once. Why not try it again?
He's a big fan of mine.
Jimmy Kimmel and George Clooney have been running that two-lane operation for almost a decade, and every time they do it in front of cameras, Donald Trump reacts the same way. He shouts, he threatens, he tries to drag the conversation back to himself. It never lasts. Clips outlive tantrums. If you remember a specific Kimmel or Clooney moment that made you stop scrolling and watch to the end, drop it in the comments so we can stack those into the next cut, then tap follow or subscribe so you do not miss the deep dive montage we are building from this.
There is a world where we could go back to where we were. I don't think it's as likely as people think, but I was wrong about the first election. I didn't think people would vote for someone who was so deeply flawed. I know Donald Trump. That's the thing is people, I have his phone number in my phone book. He was the guy that came to the bars and asked me about which cocktail waitress was single. That's who he was.
This is back in the 90s.
Not that long, no, back in the 2000s, quite honestly. And so there's this part of you that just goes, well, that guy shouldn't be president. But I was wrong, and he was. And our democracy, I believe, paid a price, certainly around the world. And I worry about the possibility. I don't think it's as good as some people are afraid of, but I do worry about it. I think we're in a time where we need some interesting candidates all around the board.
Start with Kimmel because he is the night shift foreman of this story. In 2017, he walked out for his monologue and told the country something simple and devastating. Healthcare is not a talking point, it is a family. He told the story of his newborn son's heart surgery, then asked a question that made senators reach for their inside voices. Will a baby with a heart defect get care if his parents cannot afford it? That line became a test people repeated at town halls and on the Senate floor. It was not about partisanship, it was about decency.
I have a story to tell about something that happened to our family last week. I'm sorry, I try not to get emotional, but it was a scary story. And before I go into it, I want you to know it has a happy ending, okay? So when I'm telling this, don't get too upset, leave that to me. But a little over a week ago on Friday, April 21st, my wife, Molly, gave birth to a boy, a baby boy. His name is William John Kimmel. Luckily, her plane was not delayed because he got to the hospital very quickly. They did an echocardiogram, which is a sonogram of the heart, and found that Billy was born with a heart disease, something called tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia.
Kimmel turned policy into a mirror and asked the government to look at itself with the lights on. The reason it hit so hard is that he did not play pundit, he played parent, and the country recognized the difference. Trumpism thrives on abstract enemies. Kimmel dragged the conversation back to a hospital room and said, "Speak plainly." The dodge and weave did not look brave after that. Kimmel's nightly rhythm after 2017 is the opposite of Trump's endless noise.
And I want to say one other thing. President Trump last month proposed a $6 billion cut in funding to the National Institute of Health. And thank God our congressman made a deal last night to not go along with that. They actually increased funding by $2 billion, and I applaud them for doing that. Because more than 40% of the people who would have been affected by those cuts to the National Institute of Health are children, and it would have a major impact on a lot of great places, including Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, which is so unbelievably sad to me. We were brought up to believe that we live in the greatest country in the world, but until a few years ago, millions and millions of us had no access to health insurance at all.
Trump throws everything at the wall to see what trends. Kimmel picks one thing, slows it down, and shows you where the lie lives in the sentence. Some nights it was healthcare spin, Other nights it was pandemic theatrics that left doctors shaking their heads. Then it was election denial with the volume knob torn off. Kimmel's desk is not just jokes. It is a small courtroom where the evidence is a clip and the jury is whoever stayed up past the local news.
It's important to try to put things in perspective. Last time my 8-year-old Billy were laying in bed and he told me that in 5 billion years, we're all gonna die. The human race is gonna be gone because the earth is gonna be consumed by the sun. And I was like, what? And I asked Alexa, I said, is that true? And she said, yeah, it is true. And you know what? Maybe we shouldn't worry so much, right, Guillermo?
Yes, yeah.
Maybe that's the moral to the story. Let's just be thankful that we are in the strong, capable, darkly bruised baby hands of the orangutan in the Oval Office.
He plays the tape, he pauses, he rewinds, he adds a line that your brain cannot forget, and he moves on before the smoke machine can refill. Nothing rattles a politician who lives on repetition more than a comedian who lives on replay. When Kimmel moderated the Los Angeles mega fundraiser with Barack Obama and Joe Biden last year, he did not pretend it was a comedy gig. He was a ringmaster for a message night, and the message was blunt. A second Trump term is not a punchline, it is a hazard.
Our president is scheduled for his annual checkup tomorrow at Walter Reed Hospital. This will be his second yearly checkup this year. He had one 6 months ago, but it feels like it's been a year, so they decided to do it again. And it's smart to do this sort of thing before Halloween. If he gets a clean bill of health, he can continue his annual tradition of eating all Eric's trick-or-treat candy. Checkup will take place in the morning tomorrow, but the White House has already released the results. He is 7'2", 180 pounds, and his erections can deadlift a Cybertruck.
The presence of Clooney and Julia Roberts turned it into the kind of night where the cameras do not blink and the headlines write themselves. That is how exposure works when the right people share a stage. You get the policy adults on one side of the couch, the cultural heavyweights on the other, and the audience walks away feeling two things at once. The stakes are high and the cool kids are paying attention. Now slide over to George Clooney. He has never needed a nightly show to make a point. He uses tentpole stages that carry live feeds all over the planet.
Poll numbers come up and go down. I would expect them to go back up again. Donald Trump's numbers went up and down. A lot of things that have to be repaired. There's a lot of healing that has to happen. It's going to take. He was just this knucklehead. I knew him before he was, a president. He was just a guy who was chasing girls. Every time you went out, he'd come over and be like, what's the name of that girl? That's all he was.
Before Trump was president, Clooney was already standing on press lines at Berlin and Cannes, telling rooms full of reporters that building a movement on fear of Muslims and refugees is not strength, it is failure dressed up as swagger. He said there would be no President Trump because Americans do not want to be ruled by fear. History did not cooperate with that prediction, but the warning aged perfectly. When he took an honorary award in Paris and used the microphone to talk about dignity instead of nostalgia,
we keep thinking we've exorcised all these demons, and we realize we're a long way from getting through with our original sins. It's unfortunate in our storytelling because suddenly some of the things that we were doing are much more literal than they were when we were doing it. But what was really frustrating about Charlottesville to me in watching it was these are moments when we're supposed to come together. These are moments when that tiny faction that doesn't represent even 1% of the country shouldn't be given a platform, certainly by the executive office of the United States of America. There can't be a comparison between two. You can't compare Black Lives Matter, who are protesting in support of racial equality, to the KKK and the alt-right, who are protesting in support of racial supremacy. Those are not, you cannot balance those two, period. And to see that happen at the highest level in our country was very disappointing and I think gutting for a lot of us.
The broadcast carried his words beyond the room. That is the thing about Clooney. He is not just a movie star. He is a guy who understands that awards shows are one of the last places where live television still exists. And live television is where a truth that would be edited out of a print profile can slip through uncut. Clooney's critique has always been a mix of manners and hard edges. He will smile on the way in, shake hands, pose for photos, and then cut to the part that makes propagandists sweat.
Do you think Trumpism lasts beyond this term?
Don't think so. I think it'd be very hard to do it. Remember this, Donald Trump is a celebrity. That's what he is. I mean, he's got You know, he has a star on Hollywood Boulevard. I don't have a star on Hollywood Boulevard. I'm not lobbying for one. I'm just saying, you know.
It seems like an oversight, by the way.
Hey, what's going on? He's a celebrity, and he's the president of the United States, and so he has been elected, duly elected. Fair deal. I'm not complaining about that. That's how it works. That's how this democracy works. But he's also a celebrity, and he is charming, and to the people who like him, they think he's funny. To a great many others, they don't. And so when he is finished, and he will be finished, they're going to have to go looking for someone who can deliver the message that he delivered with the same kind of charisma, and they don't have that.
He does not shout. He does not play insult tennis. He flips the frame. Instead of treating xenophobia as a policy disagreement, he calls it what it is, a failure of courage. That framing matters because it scrambles the tough guy brand Trump sells. If toughness is picking on people with less power, then toughness is a cheap costume. Clooney says that out loud without using those exact words, and you can see the room do the math.
If it really happens, it would be pretty damaging to the business. Look, he's not wrong about the idea that businesses have left Los Angeles. They have in droves. What we need is, the incentives, the tax incentives that you get here in New York, by the way. They're building studios here because there's so much work. We need those. And by the way, if he really wants to fix it, then we should talk about a federal incentive passed to keep people working in Los Angeles, because there are tons of below-the-line people, grips and cinematographers, who are losing their jobs because work is going away, leaving to states, to New York and Louisiana and places like that, but also to London and other places. So it'd be nice if we had a federal sort of rebate.
Back to Kimmel for a second, because his recent suspension saga says more about Trump's instincts than any statement. The show was yanked, the pressure was obvious, and a government official who should have known better decided to flex online like a hall monitor with a badge. Artists and civil liberties groups answered with a chorus that networks hate to hear because it means lawyers get phone calls. Free speech is not a prop. Kimmel returned within days and opened with the kind of grin you only earn when your enemies hand you a better joke than anything in rehearsal.
No matter how bad you think your job is, it's important to remember there's someone out there who has to give Donald Trump a prostate exam. For some, literally. For others, just figuratively.
How about we go to Marco? You can talk a little bit about what's going on, and
well,
go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. President. I don't know if one day perhaps the entire story will be told about the events of yesterday, but suffice it to say, it's not an exaggeration that none of it would have been possible without the President of the United States being involved.
Do you have any idea how difficult it is to give the president a prostate exam with Marco Rubio poking his nose up there all the time?
Attempts to control comedy always turn into comedy. It is physics. Clamp down on a punchline and you just built a bigger spring. When it snaps back, the sound travels. The Kimmel and Clooney lanes meet on nights like that Los Angeles fundraiser, but they do not depend on each other. Each has his own delivery system. Kimmel has the nightly drumbeat that turns complicated into clear. Clooney has the big tent moments that make the evening news, even if you do not have cable.
He won't power down. He's like Ultron. He just keeps going. Every day, it's something crazier than the next. I made a list. This is all in the last 2 months. I made you a quick list. I will run through it. He paved over the Rose Garden. He's building a golden ballroom at the White House. He's planning a UFC fight at the White House. He cut off Kamala Harris's Secret Service protection. He named himself host of the...
They don't have anybody that's as charismatic as him. He's charismatic. There's no taking that away from him. He's a television star. If you're a Democrat, we have to find some people to represent us better, who have a sense of humor and who have a sense of purpose.
Trump hates both because they strip away his favorite escape routes. When a comedian is holding up a receipt in one hand and a punchline in the other, there is no room to pivot to a grievance about crowd size. When a movie star is on a live broadcast saying that fear politics is a scam, there is no quick way to sell the scam as heroism. You can hear the frustration in Trump's responses whenever these moments hit. He goes after Kimmel's ratings as if arithmetic will erase a clip. He goes after Clooney's relevance as if the number of Instagram followers in the room will change the fact that the speech aired and people nodded along. It is the same tell every time.
There's a rumor making the rounds this weekend that Trump was dead because he hadn't been in front of a camera for a few days. That's how much he's in front of a camera. When we don't see him there, we assume he must be dead. And also he has mysterious bruising on his hand, which they tried to cover up with makeup. And this cover-up's even sloppier than the Epstein one. How could anyone let him go out like this? I mean, like he was spackled. He had to have done that himself, right? Looks great, sir. No one will notice a thing. The White House claims the reason for these bruises and his big fat elephant ankles is he suffers from a condition known as chronic venous insufficiency, which in layman's terms means he's got a very small venus. He's got an insufficient...
He cannot argue the point, so he attacks the platform. Here is where you jump in. Comment with the single Kimmel clip you think aged the best, or the Clooney soundbite that should be in every highlight reel. Then share this with one person who swears celebrity voices do not matter. They do, and not because fame equals wisdom. They matter because live television is one of the last truth amplifiers we have, and Kimmel and Clooney use it better than most politicians do. If you want us to keep building these cut by cut, hit subscribe so you catch the next premiere.
And I think unjustly, this puts them at risk. The President of the United States made it very clear he wants to see me and the hundreds of people who work here fired from our jobs. Our leader celebrates Americans losing their livelihoods because he can't take a joke.
Look at how the reactions from Trump underline the exposure. When Kimmel pressed the healthcare argument into a human shape, Trump's allies tried to swing back with the usual lines about snowflakes and elites. It misfired because the messenger was a dad and the message was a heart on a monitor. When Kimmel returned from suspension, the attempt to frame him as reckless turned into a larger conversation about politicians pressuring networks.
And it's not just comedy. He's gunning for our journalists too. He's suing them, he's bullying them. Over the weekend, his foxy friend Pete Hegseth announced a new policy that requires journalists with Pentagon press credentials to sign a pledge promising not to report information that hasn't been explicitly authorized for release. That includes unclassified information. They want to pick and choose what the news is. I know that's not as interesting as muzzling a comedian, but it's so important to have a free press, and it is nuts that we aren't paying more attention.
That is not a winning headline for a man trying to sell himself as a free speech champion. When Clooney stood at Cannes and said the quiet part, Trump World tried to wave it off as Hollywood preaching. Then those lines re-aired on newscasts in cities Trump needs to win, and the shrug stopped working. The pattern is simple. Every attempted counterpunch keeps the original critique in circulation longer. Every tantrum produces a second day of coverage. If your public persona is built on controlling the camera, the worst thing that can happen is a loop you do not control.
Able to squeeze Colbert out of CBS, then he turned his sights on me, and now he's openly rooting for NBC to fire Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers and the hundreds of Americans who work for their shows who don't make millions of dollars. And I hope that if that happens, or if there's even any hint of that happening, you will be 10 times as loud as you were this week. We have to speak out against this.
There is a world where we could go back to where we were. I don't think it's as likely as people think. But I was wrong about the first election. You know, I didn't think people would vote for someone who was so deeply flawed. You know, I mean, I know Donald Trump. You know, I mean, that's the thing is people. You know, I have his phone number in my phone book. He was the guy that came to the bars and asked me about which cocktail waitress was single. You know, that's who he was.
This is back in the 90s.
Not that long, no, back in the 2000s, quite honestly. And so there's this part of you that just goes, well, that guy shouldn't be president. But I was wrong, and he was. And
there is another reason this pairing burns through spin. Kimmel speaks in the language of receipts, and Clooney speaks in the language of values. Together, they box the compass. One shows you the invoice for what was done and the cost that followed. The other asks what kind of country you think you are if you accept that invoice without blinking. Trump's act fails that test from both angles. When you line up the clips of him promising one thing and doing another, the bill is painful to look at.
He's going to be a factor for a while. It's so funny because, you know, he was just this knucklehead. I knew him before he was a president. He was just a guy who was chasing girls. Every time you went out, he'd come over and be like, "What's the name of that girl?" That's all he was. And the idea that there's this whole group of people that, that they think he's the champion of, which he certainly can't stand in real life. But, he's gonna play this out for a while, and we'll see where we go with it.
The answer writes itself. Kimmel gives you the evidence. Clooney gives you the conscience. People can ignore one for a while. They have a hard time ignoring both at once. If you have been around long enough to remember Clooney's interviews from 2016, you remember a man laughing sadly at the idea that America would pick a celebrity bully over its better angels. If you watched him in Paris the next year, you remember a man using an awards night to tell a country that hate is not a brand. If you watched Kimmel the same season, you remember the monologues that made jokes out of nonsense and sense out of chaos.
Look, I never imagined I would be in a situation like this. I barely paid attention in school. But one thing I did learn from Lenny Bruce and George Carlin and Howard Stern is that a government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American. That's anti-American. And I am so glad we have some solidarity on that from the right and the left and from those in the middle like Joe Rogan.
There is a reason those moments still land when you play them back today. They were not hot takes, they were cold truths. They did not need the news cycle to help them, the cycle needed them to explain itself. Here's the counter argument you will hear from people trying to protect Trump's feelings. They will say Kimmel and Clooney are elites lecturing the heartland. That line is older than color television and just as easy to debunk. The Kimmel test did not ask if coastal media felt respected. It asked if a child on a ventilator gets treated like a human being regardless of the family bank account.
Kennedy Center honors. He went to Alaska to bend over for Putin. He sent military tanks into Washington, D.C. He said the Smithsonian focuses too much on how bad slavery was. He called India and Norway to tell them to nominate him for a Nobel Prize. And he cut off funding for pediatric brain cancer research for children. You would think a person who himself has the brain of a child would be in favor of funding pediatric brain cancer.
Clooney's speeches did not ask anyone to buy a movie ticket. They asked people to look a refugee in the face and remember what their grandparents taught them about decency. If that is elitism, we need more of it, because the alternative is a politics that bullies the weak and worships the rich and tells the rest of us to be grateful for the show. Trump knows he loses in those rooms, which is why he tries to drag every conversation back into the arena where he thinks he wins. He wants chants, not questions.
I was in Palm Springs. I even got to be part of a big meeting in Washington, D.C.
Christy?
Well, Mr. President, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to work for you. Mr. President, I invite you to see your big, beautiful face on a banner in front of the Department of Labor.
Thank you for saving college football, by the way. We're all very grateful.
You are the single finest candidate since the Nobel this Nobel Award was ever talked about.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, I want you to know sometimes when I watch you striding across the White House lawn so confidently, with so much masculinity, I'll admit it, I get sexually aroused. Thank you for breathing life back into my once slumbering penis.
Trump's response proves the point every time. He loses it, he huffs about ratings, he threatens networks, he calls actors names and begs the crowd to laugh at the wrong person. The crowd sees through it because the receipts are on the screen and the values are on the table. That is all exposure is. Not a secret leak, not a gotcha, not a plot twist. It is a bright light, a live feed, a steady voice, and a country that remembers how to listen when people speak without flinching. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to America Facticity